to wait out their immigration cases in the United States. Newsmax White House correspondent Emerald Robinson joining us more with that. Emerald, we're talking about how we're allowing people in without getting tested, and we have rules right now just to get back into the state of New York. I was telling Sean while I was traveling yesterday, I had to go through 3 checkpoints to ensure that I, in fact, had filled out my paperwork.
Right. Yeah, and this is in the middle of a global pandemic. There's been mixed messaging from the White House and the Biden Department of Homeland Security on exactly which migrants will receive tests or if they will or not. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But as you said, on this Friday, February the 19th, the Biden administration will start processing and releasing over 25,000 migrants who were a part of the Remain in Mexico. President Biden ended last month via executive order. Now, that Trump-era program was aimed at curbing asylum fraud by forcing asylum seekers to wait out their processing in Mexico. The Biden administration has been trying to keep the release location silent, but John Bender of Breitbart is reporting that there's 3 different cities they'll be releasing these migrants into. That's going to be San Diego, California, El Paso, Texas, and Brownsville, Texas. Now, the plan is to currently, starting February 19th, and for 2 weeks to release 300 migrants a day in both San Diego and El Paso, and then 100 migrants a day in Brownsville. The problem is they've been keeping it secret. The White House hasn't even confirmed these locations yet, but they've also not been coordinating with state and local officials in these areas about the release, which could pose potential problems. Now, as you also mentioned, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and as I've said, there's been mixed messaging from the White House and DHS on if these migrants are getting tested. Now, what we seem to think is happening now, what we've been found out from talking to different people, is that there's 2 different groups of migrants and they're being handled differently. First off, those who are going to be processed via that are coming out of the Remain in Mexico policy that they've ended will receive testing according to DHS, but asylum seekers who are coming across the border and being released into the United States that were not part of that program currently is not being tested. Now, we don't know. There's been no word on why the 2 sets of migrants are being treated differently. And if you'll recall, less than 2 weeks ago, I asked White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki about the potential public safety issues that are and the threats that are posed, given that we are in a global pandemic, and they've increased the number of asylum seekers that now can come across the border. And I didn't really get an answer on that. Rachel, Sean.
All right, Emerald Robinson, thank you so much.
Well, today is President's Day. Most notably, we honor the birthday of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, which is typically the 3rd Monday in February. But it's also a day where we have honored our presidents officially for now more than 130 years, since 1888. So how are Americans celebrating this day when our political world is so divided, some would say? Joining us now to discuss this is Doug Weed, presidential historian and former advisor to President George H.W. Bush, and author of this book, Inside Trump's White House. We're pleased to have Craig Shirley joining us. He is a Reagan biographer and a presidential historian. And our Monday panelists are back: Joe DeGenova, former United States Attorney for Washington, D.C., and Victoria Tunsing, former Chief Counsel, Senate Intelligence. Good to see all of you here. What a day to spend together. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot to celebrate. Craig Shirley, I'll go to you first. Just talk to me about this and being around presidents. How should Americans be celebrating a day like today?
Well, it should be reverential. It should be a very special day. This is George Washington's birthday. This is the father of the American Revolution, the first president of the United States. The oldest republic in the world is because of him. It should be a well-honored day, and yet it is. We almost think of it as an afterthought. We call it President's Day. I grew up, it was George Washington's birthday. You had Abraham Lincoln's birthday. You have a number of men and women who have done significant things for this country and ought to have days to notify them, to remember them. And this day is not being revered the way it should be. It is just treated like any other holiday, and that's a shame.
Doug Weed, your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, we owe a lot. They took the first steps towards liberty. Now, they're very flawed individuals, and I could tell you stories about all of them, starting with Washington. But I think the way we treat our presidents says more about us than it does about the presidents. We enshrine them in marble. I mean, there would be no discussion today on social justice if it weren't for Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for George Washington. So however flawed they may be, they took the first precious steps towards freedom.
They're human beings.
And
They're
free
flawed.
speech.
Joe, I'll go to you next. We talk about President's Day, and it's hard to believe we just got done with an impeachment and an acquittal over the weekend, and now we move right into President's Day. How do you read that?
Well, February 22nd, which is George Washington's birthday, is my birthday. And so I have traditionally been thrilled with February 22nd and George Washington. But I'm even more thrilled with George Washington now because so many Democrats, leftists, and nutsos hate him. And they hate him because they are ignorant. George Washington is a towering figure in American history and American politics and American governance. A general, a brilliant man, somebody who didn't want to be president, who didn't want a second term. He is an amazing figure in American history. And all of us who believe in American history are going to fight like hell, if I may borrow a phrase, to keep George where he belongs, on Mount Rushmore.
Victoria.
I have a question. If we can have a Martin Luther King Day, which I support, of course, why can't we have a George Washington Day and an Abraham Lincoln Day? By calling it the President's Day, we've made it come in and buy the white linens. They're on sale day. And it really is a shame that we don't have some kind of special ceremony to celebrate these two great men.
Hear, hear.
Craig Shirley.
Yeah, denigrates it.
Craig, your thoughts?
I agree with Victoria. And by the way, happy birthday, Joe. I'm sure you're 39 years of age. You're celebrating your 39th anniversary. Like Reagan used to say, he said, you know, when he was 60 years old, he'd say, I'm celebrating the 31st anniversary of my 39th birthday. I kind of lost my train of thought. But George Washington was unanimously chosen to preside over the Continental Congress. He was unanimously chosen as leader of the Continental Army. He was unanimously chosen as our first president, and he was unanimously chosen to be reelected as president. This is a great man. When he laid down his sword, King George III of England said, if George Washington surrenders power and lays down his sword at the end of the Revolution, he will be regarded as the greatest man in the world. And that is exactly what George Washington did. He laid down his sword to the Continental Congress, and he was regarded as the greatest man in the world.
Doug Weed, how will the White House be commemorating a day like today, President's Day?
Your guess is as good as mine when it comes to the Biden White House. They're having to tread very, very carefully. Everything is in question. It reminds me, in the Soviet Union, they had a common expression. They'd say the past is unpredictable because they were constantly rewriting it. I'm afraid that's where we're headed in the United States. It's going to constantly be rewritten. And the cancel culture, there's no end. Think of this. 5 Native American Indian tribes had slaves. I mean, you're going to have to rename Virginia because it was named after the Virgin Queen, and there was slavery until 1834 in the British Empire. So we're going to have a lot of changes with cancel culture, but I'm going to honor these presidents. And I think Ronald Reagan was one of the greatest of them all.
Does that matter?
I don't think that matters. They had the powerful press back then, too.
I'll leave it right there. I'm out of time, guys. I'm going to have my panelists stick around, of course. We got you for the hour. Doug Weed, Craig Shirley, always great to see you guys today. Thank you for taking the time.
See you, Sean. Thank you.